Have you ever stumbled across something or some moment that completely changed your life? Think about that for a moment. Have you ever just stumbled across something that was unexpected that changed your life? A few years ago, my wife Prudy and I were leading a church group. We went to Omer Ammergau, and some of you will immediately recognize that, but some of you may not know the experience that happens there. Every 10 years, they do a passion play there. The roles are handed down through families, and it's been going on for centuries. It's one of the great cultural events of the world. And while we were there, we were leading our group through Austria and northern Italy and all around parts of Italy. And everywhere we would go, particularly in Italy, I would be walking down these cobblestone streets and trip and stumble, right? Now the streets there are hard enough, because of the cobblestones. They're uneven, they're ancient. But everywhere along the way, there would be these little stones that would be sticking up with a brass plaque on them. And they were never like off to the side somewhere. They were always right where you were walking, going into a doorway, going through a gateway. And they were in the worst possible places. And I didn't care anything about them because I thought, I don't care what prince rode his horse here or what queen bought a hat here. I don't care about any of that stuff. And after tripping over one for about the 50th time, I turned to our guide, who was a Jewish friend of ours, was helping lead our group. And I said, what are these things? What are these stupid things in the street? And he became very quiet. He said, Pastor Robert, those are Stolperstein, which in German means stumbling stone. He said, each one of them marks the spot where someone was arrested by the Nazis and taken away for execution. This marks the last spot they were free before they were killed. And there are 50,000 of them scattered around. We don't move them. We want them to stick up. We want to remember. Not just that a lot of people were killed, but if you look on the Stolperstein, you'll see their name and a little bit about them. So you remember there were real people who lived in this house or worked in this shop or were a doctor in this clinic. Most of them were Jews, like me, he said. But some of them were people who weren't Jews at all. They were just trying to help Jews. And then he looked at me and said, it's important that we remember. I stumbled across something that changed my life and the way I looked at life. In America right now, we're trying to forget a lot of things. We're trying to forget our past and our history, at least in certain ways. We're trying to forget that this was a nation formed with the concept of freedom and justice for all, even though from the beginning we didn't really practice that. As a church right now, we're forgetting sometimes that the church is God's living mission in the world, sent to bring blessing, hope, and peace to everyone. That Jesus Christ was sent to the world to die, to give his life, so that all might have salvation, not just my group, my political caucus, my church, or my denomination, or even my faith. Christ came for all. It's easy when things get difficult and hard to forget, and there are things that are so painful, we would just as soon push them aside and not think about them anymore. The Stolperstein are there to keep people from doing that. And we need to have things in our life as human beings that keep us from forgetting or pushing away the pain that's all around us. Some of you know I love basketball. I love basketball. especially the Thunder. And so this week, I built my whole week around watching the Thunder games. You know, that was the highlight of my week. My wife said, what do you want to do for your birthday? I want to watch the game. You want to have a party with your grandkids? What grandkids? I want to watch the game, right? I want to watch the game. And then you know what happened, right? The games were canceled, right? Because players were saying there's this problem in America and we just can't keep playing in light of what's happening. And I was mad. I was mad, right? Because I don't like my sports and politics mixed. I don't like my entertainment and world events mixed. You know, I like that moment when the ball starts to dribble up and down the court and to watch it hopefully go through the hoop and I forget about everything, right? And there's enough of me that just went, Now, I got to be honest, part of that's my personality. My wife will tell you. If she serves lunch and there's a sandwich and there are pickles on the side, if the pickle juice gets on the bread, I'm not eating it, right? I'm one of those people who wants to spend their whole life in compartmentalized, you know, like those trays you get in the cafeteria, you know, with little walls in between the different, you know, foods. That's me, right? Some of you are like that, right? Because I want my religion over here in its own little compartment. I want my intellectual pursuits over here in its little compartment. I want sports over here in its compartment, family over here in its compartment, politics over here in its compartment, and I don't want them mixed. Some of you can dump anything on a plate and eat it all. It just gives me the willies, right? That's how I live my life. That's how I'm wired. Don't blame me, blame my parents. That's how I was wired together, put together. And so when that happened, I was angry. So I'm watching basketball because I want to forget about all the rest of this stuff going on in the world, in the country, and in the nation. I want to forget about racial problems. I want to forget about COVID. I want to forget about all of that stuff. I want to forget about that I'm a pastor in a church and most people can't even come to it right now because of a disease. I want to forget all of that. I just want to see the ball bounce up and down and go through the hoop. And that's how I felt. And then I started to actually listen to the players. Some of these guys are awesome guys. Russell Westbrook doesn't even play here anymore. Russell Westbrook has built more libraries for children in Oklahoma than any other entity in state history. Enos Cantor, a Muslim, who hadn't played here for several years now, plays on another team, is building an inner city school in Oklahoma City for the most vulnerable kids in our state to help them get an education. And I started to listen. And you know, when it was about politics, I didn't want to hear it. But when I finally realized that it was a cry of anguish, I looked at it differently. I looked at it differently when I heard black players say that I have everything except I'm afraid for my children growing up in this culture. There's things that we want to push aside, we want to push back into the shadows, we don't want to deal with. And let me just tell you, anytime you're in that kind of place in life, God will confront you. He may use an NBA game, he may use a burning bush, but somehow God will get your attention. That's who God is. Because God hears the cries of the anguished. And God will always call us to minister to that pain. Moses wanted to forget. Moses had every reason to forget. He needed to forget. Moses had this amazing life, right? He was a Jewish guy, not Jewish, no Jews yet, Hebrew. They're going to be Jews, but they're Hebrews now, slaves. Growing up in Goshen, which we've talked about, northern Egypt, you know, descended from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Growing up there, and Pharaoh looks at all of these Hebrews and said, man, they're producing children like crazy. They may overwhelm us. So Pharaoh gives this order to kill all of the Hebrew boys. Little babies, when they're born, throw them in the Nile. In case you don't know it, that river's filled with crocodiles. And so Moses' mom's very clever. She places him in a little floating basket called, you're going to like the word, ark, called an ark. Pushes him out in the water, in God's providence, he's led to and discovered by the daughter of Pharaoh. The very daughter of the one who's given the order to put him to death. And she takes compassion on him. She takes him in, and by hook or crook, God manages to arrange things so that he is cared for by his own biological mother. He grows up as a prince of Egypt in the king's palace. Most powerful man in the world was the Pharaoh of Egypt at that time. And Moses is growing up in his palace. Moses is being cared for by his parents, who Pharaoh's paying to take care of him. That's how God does things so amazing, right? But one day Moses sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, and he just can't help it, and he kills the man. His passion's overwhelming. A few days later, he sees a couple of Hebrews fighting, and he tries to intervene. They say, you stay out of our business, Moses. We know what you've done, and we know where the body is buried. And so Moses decides he better skedaddle. And he runs away. He runs away from being a former prince, being a Hebrew, a slave. He runs away from being a murderer. And he goes to the land of the Moabites. Now, that doesn't mean a lot right now, right? Later, centuries later, the Moabites will stand with Israel. When Israel is facing destruction, they will stand and fight side by side with Israel. But that's centuries down the road. Eventually, a Moabite woman will marry a Jewish man, and their descendant will be Jesus Christ. But that's centuries down the road. Her name's Ruth. Right now, they're just this little tribe of people. And they take Moses in. And Moses marries the priest's daughter, and he becomes a shepherd. And he's just out in the wilderness trying to forget the life he left behind. He calls himself a ger. I want you to say that, ger. There you go. Say it like you mean it, ger. There you go. Right? So that's Hebrew for alien. Someone who has no home, someone who doesn't belong anywhere. Right? The Hebrews don't want him, he thinks, because they're going to turn him in for murder. The Egyptians don't want him because he's a traitor to them. These Moabites don't recognize him as one of their own, even though he lives with them and marries into their tribe. They still see him as an outsider. And he's this broken, empty guy. So he's out herding his sheep, and he comes to Mount Horeb, which is Sinai, the mountain of God. 3.5 years ago, roughly, I was at the base of that mountain praying a prayer to the Lord that led me to become your pastor. Be careful when you get near that mountain. Moses is there herding sheep, and suddenly he sees a bush that's on fire but not consumed. It is nothing happens to it, it just blazes, but nothing happens to it. And Moses is incredibly curious. My family will tell you most of the trouble I've gotten into in my life is because I'm too curious. And sometimes I ask questions that are intrusive and impolite. I will say to people, particularly people I love, why are you doing that? What made you think that was a good idea? Stuff I shouldn't really ask. Just curious, it's really innocent, but sometimes it doesn't come across that way. Moses is so curious, he's got to go see it. And as if it wasn't weird enough that there was a bush there on fire that never was consumed, the bush starts to talk to him. Let me just tell you, when the flora and the fauna start to have conversations with you, you need to be really careful about what's going on, right? I've never met a talking shrub, but I'm sure if I did, I would run away. But Moses stays. And this is God, who has come down from the mountain to engage one of his children. Because that's what God does for us. Comes down from the sacred, the holy, and the transcendent place. Because he loves us and seeks us out. It is God who pursues Moses, not Moses who pursues God. And that's the story of my life and maybe the story of your life as well. God identifies God's self by saying, I am the God of Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac. I'm the Elohim, which is just a general word for God, okay? So back then, this is again before Judaism gets started. They're not in the promised land or anything yet. They believe what everybody else believes. There's a God of the tree and a God of the rock and a God of the stream and a God of the river. So he's just saying he's a God. Elohim, general God, small g. But I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moses knows those are his grandparents. So if you're the God of them, probably you're the God of me. And then God says to him, Moses, take off your shoes. You're standing on holy ground. I can't emphasize enough the importance of this. You've got to really have this concept and understanding that God is transcendent. God is immanent, loves us, comes to know us through Jesus Christ in a personal way, and yet there's a part of God that is transcendent above us and beyond our understanding, beyond our comprehension. To be in the presence of God is to be in the presence of holiness, otherworldliness, supernaturalness. One of the great crying broken things in American culture today is we don't recognize anything as holy, right? We reduce everything to the lowest common denominator. We can all get exactly the same thing at the same time in the same moment from Amazon if we want to, right? Nothing is special. Nothing is set aside. I was with a woman this week. She gave me permission to share part of her story with you, which she was coming to me for counseling. And she had bought into the great American lie. And I love this country, but there's some things in this country that have to change, and this is one of those things. This lie we have in our culture that we need to let children choose everything, right? We need to let children decide what's good for them. And she had bought into the lie to the point where she had decided with her children she would never instruct them in any kind of religion. She said, I'm going to wait until they're old enough and they'll make a decision for themselves. And that's exactly what her daughter had done. And her daughter had chosen nihilism as her religion. Now, you may not know what that is. I wrote a master's thesis on it. It's the belief system that nothing really matters. Nothing has any value. There is no hope. The worst in the world is as good as it's ever going to be. And because of that, the girl was clinically depressed and suicidal. And the mother said, but I don't understand. I let her choose. When we let people choose, our children choose, when we don't help them see that there are things in this world, parts of our existence that are transcendent and holy, we shouldn't be surprised when they focus their life on things that are less than. And those things become the center of their life. When we tell our children that there's nothing holy in the world, then don't be surprised when they decide to burn it all down. Right? If you devalue something, you can destroy it. And that's an outward manifestation of what those people are feeling on the inside. Understand that. We look at it as a property issue, and if it was my business, that's certainly the way I would feel. But it's a spiritual issue. Because when we devalue everything around us and say there's nothing holy or powerful or transcendent, then we must be meaningless as well. God says, Moses, take off your sandals. You're standing on holy ground. There are things in this world that are bigger and more powerful than you are. And we are accountable to the one who is holy. Now, there's a second dimension to this. You know, we'd light 2 candles on the altar, one for the divinity of Christ, one for the humanity of Christ. And there's 2 things going on in this story as well. In one way, God is saying, take off your sandals. You're standing on holy ground. You're in the presence of something powerful. And let me just tell you, when you're in trouble, you want a God who is powerful and transcendent, not a God who's not, right? So he's saying, in one sense, God is powerful. I'm powerful. I'm powerful. But then he says also, take off your shoes for another reason. Remember what Moses was? Moses was a what? Gur? What? Gur, right? Right? Someone who had no home, no place, no family, no body. And God is saying, Moses, take off your shoes. You're home, buddy. You're home. You're part of my family. You can take your shoes off, put your foot up on the table. It's okay. You belong to me. You're part of my family. Now, we need to know God in both ways. We need to know God who loves us and is intimate and close to us. And in a minute, Moses is going to understand how all that works. But we also need to understand God is powerful and transcendent. Because when we're asked to do great and extraordinary things, that power has to come from God, not us. So God tells Moses what he wants him to do. I want you to go approach the most powerful man in the world, the man you're running from, the man you're terrified of, the Pharaoh of Egypt. And I want you to tell him to let those Hebrew children, those slave people go. And I'm going to take them, says God, to a land that's overflowing with milk and honey. No oil, by the way, but anyway. It's a little Jewish joke that Jewish folk like to tell, right? You go do that, Moses. And Moses says, who am I? Anytime you feel God calling you to do something and your response is, I'm not adequate, you're missing the point, right? Moses comes up with this list about 20 feet long of all the reasons why he can't do what God is asking him to do. I can't speak, I can't talk, I'm not able. I'm not able. God is asking him to do something extraordinary. This is a burning bush moment in American history. God is asking us to be an extraordinary people. This is a burning bush moment in the life of the Methodist Church. God is asking us to be extraordinary. You're here today because this is your burning bush moment. God is asking you to do something extraordinary with your life starting right now today. So you got to get the next part right. Finally, Moses said, well, who shall I tell them is sending me? And God answers with 5 names. Oh, they're all in one in the English translation of the Bible. I am who I am. It's the Hebrew verb for being. There are 5 different ways to translate that phrase, and they should all be used at the same time. I am who I am. I will be who I will be. I'm becoming who I'm becoming. I'm existence because I'm existing. I am the one who is and will always be. Those should all be spoken at the same time as God's name. But Americans, we love to shorten things. The point is that there are 2 verb tenses in Hebrew. You didn't come for a grammar lesson, but you're going to get one. There's 2 verb tenses in Hebrew. There's the perfect tense, right? Which is it's finished, it's done. Jesus speaks that in that tense on the cross. And then there's the imperfect tense, which is a verb is an action, reflects an action that is continuing. God is saying, I am the one who is creating. The one who is being and will continue to be. The one who becomes and will continue to become. I am the author of creation and I'm still creating. God is about movement. God is never in one place. God is always pushing possibility and potential, always pressing us and pushing us into the future. You have an extraordinary calling and an extraordinary future because that's how God is. And if you serve God, that's where you're going to go. You may have a million excuses, but that's where you're going to go. When I was a little child and I stuttered and had a lisp, I would sit in the back of the church because I didn't want anybody to talk to me. I didn't want them to say hello because I didn't want to have to try to respond. My grandmother would wrap her arms around me and she would point at the preacher at the front of the church giving a sermon. She didn't care what he was saying. She was good with her faith. Whatever the preacher wanted to say was fine. She'd wrap her arms around me and she would point at the preacher and she'd say, Junior, you're going to be able to do that someday. We'd go home and she'd turn John F. Kennedy on the black and white TV and she'd sit me in front of the TV and she'd say, someday you're going to be able to speak just like that man. And she believed it because she believed it, I believed it. Sometimes people are so hurt and broken and crushed that we have to loan them faith. We have to believe for them. And faith is contagious. Nothing can quench it. Nothing can put it out. It is that fire in the burning bush that can never be extinguished. If you give someone faith and hope, they will burn brightly against all of the darkness. God says, Moses, you're going to go. You're going to do extraordinary things because I will be with you. And in this world, beloved, you and I are called. We're called to hear the cries of the people in anguish, just as God heard the cries of the Hebrew children. We're called to respond, just as Moses was called to respond. Wherever you are in life, this is your burning bush moment. God is saying to you, take off your shoes a while, catch your breath, but then go, and I will go with you. As we were walking through the streets of Genoa in Italy, and I was talking to our guide, he introduced me to a wonderful book. It's a book that a wonderful Jewish author wrote about that experience of the Jews there in northern Italy. You can put the slide up if you have it, Kevin. There it is. I couldn't remember Mary Doria Russell's name. A Thread of Grace is a wonderful book. It tells the story of how the Jews came to northern Italy during World War II because they thought it was safe. thousands of refugees. They didn't realize that Mussolini had turned it over to Hitler and that Hitler had sent his SS troops to slaughter the Jews there. Her story is a reflection. It contains a line that one of the rabbis who was there helping the refugees, what he said, no matter how dark the tapestry is, God always weaves a thread of grace. Little farm families of Italy, fishing families of Italy, Christian Italians, Catholics of Italy, rescued people who were of different race than them, different religion, from different countries than theirs. They took in Jewish refugees by the thousands, and sometimes were put to death because of it. The people of Liguria, Italy, and Genoa saved over 50,000 Jewish refugees in World War II because they remembered. Because each one can say, I know who I am, and I know the great I am. This is your calling. To go out into the world, to trust in God to lead you, and to pour out your heart where you find pain and brokenness. This is the word of God in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.